December 2013. Home Affairs, Wilson Room, 3rd of December 2013.
Order. Could I call the committee to order and welcome our witness for today's session, Alan Rusbridger, the editor of The Guardian. Mr. Rusbridger, you are giving evidence as part of the committee's inquiry into counter-terrorism, and thank you very much for coming here this afternoon. Can I refer all those present to the register of members' interests, where the interests of the members of this committee are noted, and could I ask other members to declare any special interests? Mr. Happert.
Thank you, Chair. I've written 2 articles for The Guardian on this issue, which is a pleasant surprise I was paid for, which I need to draw the committee's attention to.
Thank you very much. And of course I should say that we are all Guardian readers, some more avidly than others. So we all declare our interests. I did read it this morning. Mr. Rusbridger, if we could start with just some facts, then members of the committee will come in and probe you on a number of issues. Can we just be clear at the start, because there was reference made to some newspapers that you've been compelled to come here against your wishes. We wrote to you and invited you to come here, and you are here as part of that inquiry. You don't feel under any compulsion, do you?
I wasn't aware it was optional, but I'm glad to be here anyway.
Well, you said yes, so there was no need to take that further. On the question of facts, you said in your written evidence to this committee very clearly that in respect of the information that you have got from Mr. Snowden, you've only published 1% of the information that you were given. Is that still correct?
It's approximately correct. So we continue to publish stuff, but it's about 1% of what we were given.
As far as I can see, you've had 58,000 files, so you're telling this committee that only 1% of the information in those files has now gone public?
Yes.
Where are the other files?
Can I give some general context which I think would help you understand about this? Because I think it's important to realise that the initial leak from Edward Snowden...
We'll come to that in a minute, Mr. Rusbridger. If you could just establish the facts with me, then please do put it in context. These are just factual questions that the committee would like. You've got a lot of files, 58,000 files. You published 1%. Where are the other files?
Well, as I would have explained, this is an ongoing story that we're writing. If you think it's sensible that I talk here about where the exact files are, I'm happy to write to you, but I'm not sure that is a really sensible thing to do about the existence of other files in different bits of the world.
But there are other files under your control in different parts of the world?
There is one file which we hold jointly with the New York Times, which is obviously in New York.
Yes. And the other files are under proper... Because this is important in respect of the inquiry. Obviously the context is important, but there is criticism that some of these files may not be under your control. They're all under your control one way or the other.
One of them, as I would have explained, I think it would be helpful if I could give some context, because it's important to understand there were 4 different sets of information that went to 4 different parties in 4 different countries in 3 different continents. I think it's important to establish that to begin with.
Sure.
One of them was The Guardian. One of them was The Washington Post, clearly not under my control. One went to Rio and one went to Germany. That's the hand of cards, if you like. We were all dealt.
Sure.
The Guardian, the security services, governments. And so I can't obviously say that the Washington Post
No, of
files
course
are under
not.
my control because they're
No, we are in
nothing to do
touch with the New York Times, and we may take evidence from the New York Times in the future, written or oral. But in terms of the files under your control, 99% of which has not been published, you have full control. You know where they are secure and in a place where you feel they can't get into other people's hands.
I believe that to be true.
Now, you also said in reply to our parliamentary colleague Julian Smith in a letter that I think that was published that there are 850,000 people in the world who have the same information as you have in those files.
We were told that 850,000 people, because this goes to the original leak, which is obviously the thing that people are most concerned about, that 850,000 people had access to the information that a 29-year-old in Hawaii, who wasn't even employed by the American government, had access to.
So these 850,000 people, this was a figure given to you of people who've got security clearance, or they would know what was in the files that you had?
I mean, obviously people were aghast. I think people at GCHQ were aghast that a 29-year-old in Hawaii, not even employed by the American government, could get access to their files. And I was told the figure of 850,000 people who had that kind of access.
So is part of the defence, because obviously there is a lot of controversy regarding your publication of this information, that you may have this information, so do 850,000 other people, and they are also in the same position, if they choose to be, as Mr. Snowden was, to release this information. So there's safety in numbers, in other words.
I think the point is that twice in the last 3 years, these giant databases that were created after 9/11 have proved porous. These secret things have escaped, and that is because so many people have access to them. That is the only point that I think we were trying to make. And when people talk about they use the word catastrophe, or the fact that there's been this catastrophic loss, people have compared it with McLean, Burgess, Philby, all kinds of things. That was down to the original leak, and that was because, as I say, this 29-year-old, who was one of hundreds of thousands of people, had access to information, and I'm sure that's something that everyone must now be considering what to do about.
Now, in respect of what was said to our sister committee, the Intelligence and Security Committee, you were severely criticised, perhaps not personally, but certainly your newspaper was, and the decision that you took, by the heads of the security services, and this is your opportunity to answer them. As Mr. Andrew Parker described what you and your newspaper did as a gift that our enemies needed to evade us and to strike us at will. And I'm sure you've heard this phrase before. John Sawyers, the head of MI6, said that our adversaries were rubbing their hands with glee. Now, all heads of the security services were very clear in their evidence to the Intelligence and Security Committee that you had damaged this country as a result of what you had done. Clearly, other editors took the decision as well. We know it's been in the New York Times and in the Washington Post and El País and Le Monde and other newspapers. But they're not before us today. Do you recognise what you have done? Do you accept that this has damaged the country? Because this is severe criticism that I haven't seen before from the head of our security services.
Well, I think it is important context that editors of probably the world's leading newspapers in America, the Washington Post and the New York Times, took virtually identical decisions. So this is not a rogue newspaper. It is serious newspapers who've had long experience of dealing with national security. The problem with these accusations is that they tend to be very vague, and they're not rooted in specific stories. You've quoted 2. I would like to quote 4 people back at you who have told me personally there has been no damage. Or who have seen. So you took evidence, I think, last week from Norman Baker, the current
Indeed.
Home Office.
Yes.
I won't repeat that evidence, but he said he had seen no damage.
Yes, that's right.
my second person we have consulted, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, so somebody who is sitting in oversight of all the intelligence, has seen it all, said to us, he asked not to be named, but we asked him, because we want to know this, have you seen anything The Guardian has published that has caused damage? And he said, I've been incredibly impressed by what you've done, how you've done it. You've written about the scope and scale. I have seen nothing that you have done that's caused damage. A senior administration official of the current Obama administration told us last week, we asked the same question, damage, he said, I've been incredibly impressed by the judgment and care that you would expect from a great news organization. And finally, a senior Whitehall official at the heart of these stories, September the 9th, I have not seen anything you have published to date which has risked lives. Mm-hmm. So there are different views about this, and I listen with respect to the views that you've given, but I don't...
But you disagree with them?
Well, it's not that I disagree, it's impossible to assess because
sure.
No one has given me specific evidence.
The real criticism is that the information that you have contains the names of individual security officers, and this has been sent round the world, sometimes paid for by The Guardian, and these names are of our security officers, people who are there to protect our country, and that's how you've damaged the country. Because others who don't have security clearance have been able to read these names, know who they are, possibly know where they live. That is the damage that they allege you have done.
Well, first of all, we have never used a single name. And that I think is the crucial bit. We've published no names and we've lost control of no names. It's never been a secret that these documents contain names. A lot of them are PowerPoint presentations given by named individuals. From the beginning of June, when we published the first presentation, we redacted the name of somebody. It was apparent that these documents had names, and when the material was seized off David Miranda, under the terror laws, it's apparent from the witness statements that the government knew then, although I would say they knew already, and in fact we discussed the use of names with the Cabinet Secretary when he visited us in mid-June. So there's been 6 months when it's been apparent that there have been names in these documents. I told the Cabinet Secretary personally that we were sharing this material with the New York Times. On July the 22nd, I gave him the editor of the New York Times phone number, email address, and Steve Engelberg from ProPublica.
Sure.
Not once in 6 months.
So you can guarantee, and I find it difficult for you to guarantee, but you're telling this committee that you can guarantee the security of all these names of these officers?
Well, your original question was the copy that the New York Times has. Do I believe that is being held securely? Yes.
Well, all the copies. I mean, anything under your control. You have these names. Can you guarantee that these names will not leak out?
I can talk about the copies under the joint control of The Guardian and the New York Times. And I can say that that is being held securely.
Right. Now, both the criticism...
Incidentally, Chairman, I just want to add that in that 6 months, it would have been open to anybody from Her Majesty's government to come and ask about the names, and that hasn't happened.
And has anyone asked you to destroy this information or hand it over?
Well, it is a matter of public record that the Cabinet Secretary came and asked me to destroy the entire cache of documents. So yes.
Right, but you haven't done so?
No, that is also a matter of public record. No, I told.
Let me ask you this finally before I go to other members of this committee. Some of the criticisms against you in The Guardian have been very, very personal. You and I were both born outside this country, but I love this country. Do you love this country?
How do you answer that kind of question?
We live in a democracy. Most of the people working on this story are British people who have families in this country who love this country. I'm slightly surprised to be asked the question, but yes, we are patriots. And one of the things we are patriotic about is the nature of the democracy and the nature of a free press and the fact that one can in this country discuss and report these things.
So the reason why you've done this has not been to damage the country, it is to help the country understand what is going on as far as surveillance is concerned.
I think there are countries, and they're not generally democracies, where the press are not free to write about these things, and where the security services do tell editors what to write, and where politicians do censor newspapers. That's not the country that we live in Britain. It's not the country that America is. And it's one of the things I love about this country, is that we have that freedom to write and to report and to think, and we have some privacy. And those are the concerns that need to be balanced against national security, which no one is underestimating. And I can speak for the entire Guardian staff who have families who live in this country that they want to be secure to.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Dr. Julian Hubbard.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Rusbridger, for coming before this committee. I hope we will have similar cooperation from the intelligence security services, because I think many of us would quite like to ask them questions. Now that they've established they can answer them in public, it should just be the people that they trust to ask them questions. They should be able to answer everyone's. I can also place on record briefly that I think Guardian has done a great service to the public debate in this country. I've put that at length elsewhere, and we had a Westminster Hall debate on it, and I think it's up to Parliament to work out how to write the rules now. But can I firstly ask, you have published very selectively. You've taken off these documents, only very small elements, and published those. If you hadn't done that, if when you were given the documents you had refused them and sent them back, say, do you think there would, what do you think would have happened to the information? Would it have been silenced, or would it have been published in some other mechanism?
Well, that's why I wanted the initial context to be understood. By the way, I don't think there is an editor on earth who offered this material would have sent it back unseen. And most editors, we asked 30 editors, leading editors in the world, to talk about this difficulty of handling secret material, and they were all familiar with doing it. They all said they would have done what the Guardian did. So you look at it and you make judgments. People talk about mass dumps of data. We haven't. We've published, I think, 26 documents so far out of the 58,000 that we've seen, or 58,000 plus. So we have made a very selective judgments about what to print. What would have happened if we had sent it back? That's the whole point of my initial point to the chairman, that Glenn Greenwald had this material in Rio, Laura Poitras had a copy in Berlin, the Washington Post had a copy. The thought that this material wouldn't have been published is ridiculous.
Now, as you know, there's a DA notice system in the UK, which is intended to put at risk, prevent people being put at risk, and particularly where there's real risk to life. Have you had any conversations with the DA notice secretary, and have they told you that the material would pose a risk to life?
Yes, we have, and out of all the stories that we've published, and I think there are about 35 of them, we have. I think we've gone back and counted this. On all the stories, we have consulted with the relevant authorities, bar one, which was the first story that we published specifically about GCHQ, which I think was on June the 16th. And the reason I didn't consult with the Dean Notice Committee was a fear of prior restraint, which exists in this country, but not in the United States. Since the Pentagon Papers case in 1972, it is inconceivable that any American government would get prior restraint of publication of this material. That reassurance doesn't exist in this country. Indeed, we were directly threatened with prior restraint by the Cabinet Secretary. And so I didn't seek the advice of the Dean Notice Committee on that story. I've engaged with Air Vice Marshal Vallance since, and Air Vice Marshal Vallance would, I think, confirm that we have been in touch since. And also that there was, to some extent, a misunderstanding, which he said extended to the Prime Minister. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the Dean Notice Committee, because the Prime Minister talked about threatening people with D-notices. That's not actually how it works. But Air Vice Marshal Vallance says that the misunderstanding is that he would have kept that material confidential from government. So we have, in fact, collaborated with him since, and he's been at The Guardian to talk to all our reporters.
And did he give you any feedback as to whether what you were publishing posed a risk to life or not?
Yes, on the overwhelming, well, he was quite explicit that nothing we had seen contravene national security in terms of risking life. No, he was explicit about that, and that's not to say that he would give us a complete bill of health for things that appeared downstream, but nothing he saw had to cause risk of life. And most of the times when we rung him up and put stories to him, his response is, there's nothing that concerns me there. This stuff may be politically embarrassing, but there's nothing here that is risking national security.
It seems like you followed a established procedure.
All but the one story.
For the vast majority of these things. I mean, you've touched on issues which are of fundamental national importance, really fundamental questions about the future of surveillance, of how much surveillance is happening, information that wasn't given to us on the Communications Data Bill, and a whole range of things about the future of privacy in a digital age. In Germany, there's huge interest in this subject. In the US, there is huge interest. Parliamentarians trying to revisit legislation, responses from the president. Why do you think there's been so little interest here? A few of us managed to secure this one big parliamentary debate. But otherwise, what we have seen, even there, was attacks on The Guardian, rather than Parliament trying to work out what the rules ought to be. Why do you think that is?
Well, shooting the messenger is the oldest diversionary trick in the book. I can't explain why some people have not taken interest in this. My experience is that when you speak to people about it and explain the issues, they're deeply interested in this. And as you say, in terms of the broader debate, I can't think of a story in recent times, I can't think of any story in recent times that has ricocheted around the world like this has, and which has been more broadly debated in parliaments, in the courts, amongst NGOs. I mean, the roll call of people who have said that there needs to be a debate about this include, I count 3 presidents of the United States, 2 vice presidents, generals, the security chiefs in the US are all saying this is a debate that in retrospect we know that we had to have. There are members of the House of Lords, people who have been charged with oversight of security measures here. The former chairman of the ISC, Tom King, said that this was a debate that had to be had and they had to review the laws. The director of national intelligence in the US said these were conversations that need to happen. So this is I mean, in terms of the public interest, I don't think anyone is seriously questioning that this leaps over the hurdles of public interest.
Thank you, Dr. Hubbard. Michael Ellis.
Mr. Rusbridger, you authorised files stolen by Snowden, which contain the names of intelligence staff, to be communicated elsewhere, didn't you? Yes or no?
Well, I think I've already dealt with that.
Well, could you just answer my question?
It was never. I think it's been known for 6 months that these documents contain names, and
yes,
that I shared them with the New York Times.
So do you accept from me that that is an offence, a criminal offence, under Section 58A of the Terrorism Act 2000?
You may be a lawyer, Mr. Ellis. I'm not, so I will leave that to you.
Now, 50,000 plus files were sent or communicated by you as editor-in-chief of The Guardian. You caused them to be communicated, and they contained a wealth of information. It was effectively an IT sharing platform between the United States and the United Kingdom intelligence services, wasn't it?
I'll leave you to express those words then.
So you decline to answer that? Very well. But that was information which contained a wealth of data, protected data that was both secret and even top secret under the protected classifications of this country.
They were secret documents.
Secret and top secret documents. And do you accept that that information contained personal information that could lead to the identity, even of the sexual orientation, of persons working within GCHQ?
The sexual orientation thing is completely new to me. If you can explain how we've done that, then I'd be interested.
In part, from your own newspaper on the 2nd of August, which is still available online, because you refer to the fact that GCHQ has its own pride group for staff. And I suggest to you that the data contained within the 58,000 documents also contained data that allowed your newspaper to report that information. It is therefore information now that is not any longer protected under the laws of this country, and that jeopardises those individuals, does it not?
You completely lost me, Mr. Ellis. There are gay members of GCHQ. Is that a surprise? And that they have a...
They're not entitled... It's not amusing, Mr. Rusbridger. They shouldn't be outed by you in your newspaper.
Well, I don't.
What about the fact that GCHQ organised a trip? Either you're going to answer the question or you're not.
Mr. Ellis,
if you let me answer, I will
if
answer.
Mr. Rusbridger could have the opportunity of answering them, please do go on. Mr. Rusbridger.
The mention of the existence of a pride group within GCHQ, actually, if you go to the Stonewall website, you can find the same information there. I fail to see how that outs a single member of the GCHQ.
Well, you said it was news to you, so you know about the Stonewall website, so it's not news to you. And it was in your newspaper. What about the fact that GCHQ organised trips to Disneyland in Paris? That's also been printed in your newspaper. Does that mean that information, if you knew that, information including the family details of members of GCHQ, is also within the 58,000 documents, the security of which you have seriously jeopardised?
Again, your references are lost to me. The fact there was a family outing from GCHQ to Disneyland...
Do you accept that these files contained methods of trapping cyber criminals, like paedophiles and hackers?
Well, the only story that has been identified to us that resembles that description is the story about Tor. And I would welcome the opportunity to talk about that.
No, I'd rather you didn't actually, but I don't see any need to further publicise that information. What about the location of safe houses and other safe locations, secret locations? 58,000 documents that contain that information.
Well, if you don't mind me just referring to Tor, because the point about Tor, because we're in danger of having a rather analogue discussion about the digital age, the point about Tor is that anybody who is remotely interested in this would have learned nothing from The Guardian that is not available on the Tor's own website. So let's get real about this. There is nothing The Guardian published that is endangering people in the way that you talk about. It is not there already.
It isn't only about what you've published, it's about what you've communicated. That is what amounts or can amount to a criminal offence. You have caused the communication of secret documents. We classify things as secret and top secret in this country for a reason. Not to hide them from The Guardian, but to hide them from those who are out to harm us. But you've communicated those documents.
Mr. Ellis, is that a question?
If you'd known about the Enigma code during World War II, would you have transmitted that information to the Nazis?
That is a well-worn red herring, if you don't mind me saying so, Mr. Ellis. I think most journalists can make a distinction between the kind of thing that you're talking about, the Enigma code or the travel of troop ships. This is very well-worn material that's been dealt with by the Supreme Court and that you learn in when you do your NCTJ course. So I can make those distinctions, Mr. Ellis. Thank you.
Have members of the board of The Guardian newspaper said to you that, or conceded to you that the law may have been broken in this matter?
No.
Have you been told by members of the board of The Guardian newspaper that your job is on the line connected with this matter?
I think you're under some misapprehension, Mr. Ellis.
I'm asking you a question.
Well, the board of The Guardian newspaper, if you understood the structure of The Guardian, has no jurisdiction over the editor of
Did The Guardian...
Mr. Ellis,
yes?
I think this needs to be your final question.
No, I think it's less than 6 minutes, Mr. Vans.
Mr. Ellis,
well,
order.
I'm coming to
Mr. Ellis, order. I'm chairing this meeting. This is your final question.
This is not a Labour love-in, Mr. Rusbridger, and I'm asking you some questions that I think you should answer. Did The Guardian pay for flights by David Miranda to courier secret files?
We pay for Mr. Miranda's flights, which was, he was acting as an intermediary between...
So you did pay for those flights. So have they been accounted for as a business expense, those flights? Is the UK taxpayer funding a tax break for the transfer of stolen files?
If you may not be familiar with the tax laws, so I think we'll move on to our next
Well, I don't
questioner.
see why you should
Order, Mr. Ellis. David Winnick.
Perhaps you're fortunate not to be in a Moscow courtroom in the 1930s, Mr. Mr. Rusbridger, with Mr. Wyszynski asking you questions. Were you surprised at the amount of intelligence gathering which was revealed as a result of what Snowden gave to your newspaper and other media outlets?
I think many people are staggered by the amount of...
Were you yourself, if I may interrupt, were you staggered and surprised?
I was staggered. I think we all knew that the intelligence agencies collected a lot of data, and people are still trying to make out as though this data, as though nothing has changed in the last 15 years since the laws were passed. We've got a lot of analog laws that deal with the digital world. I think the last serious law that was passed about any of this material was 2000, which was at a time when Facebook hadn't been invented, when Google was still doing its initial funding round. And we're pretending that the laws that covered really crocodile clips on copper wires are stretchable to deal with the collection of maybe 3 billion phone events and the metadata around those a day. So yes, I think there is a staggering amount of information being collected, which has surprised even those who passed the laws that apparently I say, authorise the collection.
Would it be right to say that since the reports have occurred, American politicians, senior American politicians in Congress, some who of course denounce, as one would expect, Snowden as a traitor, others have expressed surprise that their own country have been involved in such intelligence gathering on the sort of extensive scale as Snowden has revealed?
The people who are most disturbed by the revelations include the people who pass the laws that are being used to justify it. So Congressman Sensenbrenner, who is a right-wing Republican, who drafted and passed the Patriot Act, he was the first person out of the stocks to say that he was appalled that the Patriot Act that he drafted was being used to justify what he regarded as un-American. To come to your question, Mr. Chairman, about patriotism. He was appalled. He said, this is not what I intended by the Patriot Act. There are currently 3 bills in Congress which are being proposed to limit...
Arising from Snowden.
Arising from Snowden, and arising from Snowden through newspapers and through our publication, which are being used to limit and these are cross-party bills to limit what's going on. So you're quite right to say that people have been extremely surprised at what's been going on, and in Congress at least, there is meaningful oversight where people are now trying to limit and place some limits on what has been going on.
Would you say, coming to our own country, that it's changed the course of debate, whether the oversight is sufficient? And the subject, of course, of the recent public session of the Intelligence and Security Committee, and I'm sure we were all impressed by the robust questioning which took place there at the time. But do you feel that, that it has changed the course of this particular debate, how far Parliament is inadequate at this stage to deal with such a vast amount of intelligence gathering involving many, many people who are not public figures?
I think it's absolutely impacted on that debate. I think there are many parliamentarians who are anxious, for instance, about what they were told during the passage of the Data Communications Bill and the so-called capability gap. And were rather appalled to learn that stuff that they were being asked to pass was already being done, and that this information wasn't shared with them at the time. And I think it comes to the heart of parliamentary oversight, and whether what is done in the name of parliamentary oversight is remotely adequate at the moment, or whether it's well resourced enough, or whether they have the technological expertise. And I would just like to quote one little section from because we've now spent about 10 minutes in this committee discussing leaks that didn't happen. The catastrophic leak that did happen was dealt with by the ISC with the following exchange. Chairman, can we assume you are having discussions with your American colleagues about the hundreds of thousands of people who appear to have access to your information? Head of MI5. All 3 of us are involved in those discussions, Chairman. Chair, thank you very much. That is the only question that has been asked in Parliament about the loss of 58,000 documents through a data sharing scheme between GCHQ and NSA. So if that amounts to oversight, the amount of oversight, the budget for oversight, is even now is £1.3 million, supposedly a secret, incidentally, which is, I think, about a third of the amount that Cheltenham Borough Council spends on car parks.
The Prime Minister in the Chamber said that he wants to reach agreement, or words to that effect, with The Guardian, but if The Guardian is not willing to see the point of view of the authorities, then with reluctance other measures may be taken. Presumably he's referring to DAE notices and the rest. Can I ask you this question? How far do you feel, sorry?
The final question.
Yes. How far do you feel there is a threat to the newspaper if you continue to publish revelations from Snowden?
Well,
do you feel under pressure?
Things have happened in this country which would be inconceivable in Europe or in parts of Europe and in America. They include prior restraint. They include a senior Whitehall official going to see an editor to say there's been enough debate now. They include asking for the destruction of our discs. They include MPs calling for the police to prosecute an editor. So there are things that are inconceivable in America under the First
Are you under pressure yourself? Do you feel this pressure from the government?
I feel that some of this activity has been designed to intimidate the Guardian. Yes,
Thank you. We must move on. But before we do, are you telling this committee that as a result of Parliament's failure to oversee the security services and the failure to have the necessary expertise and the failure to have a sufficient budget, that's why you were obliged to publish, because had you not done so, nobody would have found out about this?
Well, the only way any of this information has come into the public domain is through the press. So all these things,
So we should look at our structures better.
We should, and America is. So when Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is the Malcolm Rifkin equivalent in America, who had been supporting the NSA for about 3 months, the Merkel telephone call happens. They didn't know about that. And she said at that point, it's abundantly clear that a total review of all intelligence programs is necessary. So that was the Oversight Committee saying we had no idea what was going on.
And in respect of our inquiry...
That must be true of our own...
I'm sorry. In respect of our inquiry, you think that it would be good if this committee looked at the structures of oversight as part of the counter-terrorism structure?
Absolutely. I think that would be an important thing.
Thank you. Mark Reckless.
You wrote in your letter of the 7th of November to Julian Smith that The Guardian hadn't published the names or identifying information for staff of our intelligence agencies. And I think in reply to the chair earlier, you added that you hadn't used or lost control of that information. Yeah. Can I clarify though, in your response to Michael Ellis earlier, did you say that you had communicated that information to the New York Times?
At the danger of repeating myself, we gave the material to the New York Times at the same time, roughly the same time as we told the Cabinet Secretary that we were doing that, and giving the Cabinet Secretary the name of the editor of the New York Times and how to contact her.
And you referred earlier to material given to the Washington Post not being under your control. The material shared with the New York Times, did that remain under your control?
The material the material was given to the Washington Post by Edward Snowden himself, by a journalist called Barton Gellman. The material that we have with the New York Times is in the joint control of myself and the editor of the New York Times.
Okay. And when you say you hadn't lost control of the relevant data at any time, does that include the periods when the data was with FedEx, who I understand you've admitted to using to transfer some of that information?
Yes, no data was lost, or no control. We lost no control of no data. No names have leaked from the Guardian.
And when I previously used Federal Express, I wouldn't sort of naturally refer to the period while whatever I was sending was with Federal Express as being a period while it was under my control. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying we haven't lost control of it. So the reporting of the FedEx transmission was grossly exaggerated. This was not. It was reported as tens of thousands of documents including MI5 and MI6 spies. That was not the case. It was material relating, it was a small amount of material relating to one story that was encrypted to military grade encryption, was sent safely, arrived safely, and didn't involve any loss of control.
You referred earlier to the information having commenced with The Guardian, The Washington Post, Rio, by which I assume Glenn Greenwald, and Germany. Are you saying that all 53,000 files began with each of those 4 places?
Can you repeat the question?
The 4 you said, Guardian,
Yeah.
Washington Post, Rio, I assume Glenn Greenwald, and Germany. You were saying that the data information had started in each of those 4 places. I'm wondering, are you saying that all of the 53,000 files had started in each of those places?
I don't think we know exactly who has what. I think probably the only person who knows that is Edward Snowden.
Okay. Was there any information which you had at The Guardian, but that Glenn Greenwald did not until you transferred it to him?
I don't know the exact answer to that, because I don't know who got what in the initial.
Why would The
handing out.
Guardian have bothered to transfer information to Glenn Greenwald if he already had it?
Because sometimes these, I don't want to get too drawn into the methodology of how we've worked, but
it's the issue there of have you communicated
yes,
this information
yes,
outside your jurisdiction?
I cannot be entirely sure what Mr. Greenwald had separately from us, what is encrypted in different ways, what is held in what ways, what he has that Laura Portcullis does or not. I've seen him on the public record say that he and Laura Portcullis are the only people who have complete sets, but I don't know that to be true.
Has he not said on the public record that the files, or some files relating to GCHQ, that The Guardian shared with the New York Times, were a set of documents that only The Guardian had until you did that?
I don't want to repeat myself too much. I don't know. I know that Mr. Greenwald has GCHQ material that he has that was given to him directly from Mr. Snowden. So I can't tell you exactly what we gave him that he didn't have already.
Yeah. I mean, I understand if you choose not to answer this question, but I mean, do you consider that you have communicated information on the identities of staff of the intelligence agencies out of jurisdiction, contrary to 58A of the Terrorism Act?
I think I've answered that to
Well,
Mr.
your answer wasn't
Chairman.
clear, at least not to me.
Well, I'll try and repeat myself clearly. I think it has been known to the government, apparent to the government, for many months that the material that Mr. Snowden leaked included a good many documents that had names of security people working for both the NSA and GCHQ. And as I said, and I'll say it again, I told the Cabinet Secretary in mid-July that we were sharing this with the New York Times.
Which you would accept constitutes communicating it outside of the
Self-evidently,
UK.
they work in New York, yes.
Okay.
And one of the reasons for that, I brought this book along with me today. Some of you will be familiar with this. The people remember in the mid-80s, the Cabinet Secretary travelling to Australia to try and suppress this book, which was written by a former MI5 agent. And we had the ridiculous sight of a British Cabinet Secretary trying to stop the publication of something that had already been published in Australia. And what was very much in my mind was the ridiculous situation that we would be in if The Guardian was the only publication in the world that was not able to publish material that was being published in Rio or Germany or around the world.
A final question, Mr. Ricketts.
You have, I think, Mr. Rusbridger admitted a criminal offence in your response just there. I wonder, I mean, do you consider that it would not be in the public interest for the CPS to prosecute, or should that be dealt with by the authorities in the normal way?
I think it depends on your view of a free press, really. In America, the Attorney General Eric Holder came out within the last 2 weeks and said that on what he had seen so far, he had no intention of prosecuting Glenn Greenwald. He's gone further. He said that under his watch as Attorney General of the US, he won't prosecute any journalists doing their duty journalistically. In New York, within the last month, I debated the former General Counsel of the NSA, Stuart Baker, and he said he makes absolutely the distinction between what Snowden did and what journalists did. He said once the information is in the hands of journalists, that is protected material.
Thank you.
And my reading of our own DPP and the guidelines that he laid down during the Leveson process is the public interest will weigh very carefully and very highly in any deliberations he takes.
But did Glenn Greenwald not also make a distinction between journalism, including what he was, according to him, engaged in, and what he says that the Guardian was doing, which was the distributing or indeed trafficking across international borders of that information?
We were sharing this material with journalistic colleagues on the New York Times in order to stimulate a debate which presidents and legislatures around the world think vital.
Thank you. Just to clarify, is there a current police investigation into The Guardian?
I don't know.
Nobody has communicated with you or interviewed you or asked you any questions about this from the Metropolitan Police?
I have seen Scotland Yard say that they are holding an investigation into the matters generally. No one has told us that whether that includes The Guardian or not.
And just for your records and for public record, the committee has decided to call Andrew Parker, the head of MI5, in open session next year. Paul Flynn.
Did you have advance notice of the questions we're asking you today?
Including yours.
I wasn't. I was told the general areas of concern that might be covered.
The stunt of having an open meeting of the intelligence and security meeting with their carefully manicured questions and rehearsed answers to a committee that's accused of being a poodle to the government, many governments, including being cheerleaders for the Iraq War. Do you think this raises the question that the scrutiny provided by that committee is inadequate and we need a reform?
Well, as I said, I think lots of people, including former chairs of the ISC, have said that there needs to be, we need to relook at the oversight. And Sir Malcolm Rifkin has himself said that he wants to look into his own committee and get. So I hope this will be an opportunity for people to talk about how oversight could be improved, because I think there's no question that it should be.
The United Kingdom government's reaction to this story has been very different from any other government, and Frank LaRue, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, has said the UK's government's response is, I quote, unacceptable in a democratic society, and the New York Times said the UK government is challenging the idea of a free, inquisitive press. Isn't that true?
I think what has been going on in the United Kingdom in the last 6 months has dismayed many people who can care about free speech, a free press. And that includes NGOs, it includes at least 2 UN special rapporteurs, it includes people in Europe and many editors around the world.
Does the fact that a 29-year-old Hawaiian and 850,000 other people had access to the information suggest that our potential enemies have access to it too?
Well, it is in the witness statement of Oliver Robinson, the Deputy National Security Advisor, that they've been working on that assumption since Snowden disappeared with the material.
Were you shocked by the revelations of the intense surveillance of allies by this country in places like the G20 and so on?
Well, again, in nature of in the question of the public interest, the fact that President Obama effectively had to concede that his country had been bugging President Merkel. There's been no denial from Australia that they were intercepting the phone calls of the President of Indonesia and his wife. And that was the thing that led Senator Feinstein to say that she had to review all the activities of the intelligence services, because clearly this was going on without knowledge. And then you'll remember that the United States came out and said, okay, we will stop bugging these gatherings of the IMF or the World Bank or all these things that they had been bugging, the European Parliament. We don't know. But there were some specific organizations of allies devoted not to espionage or to hostility, but to bridge building and peacemaking. A lot of institutions set up after the Second World War. The United States has come out and said, we won't be bugging them anymore, which to me is an implicit admission that they were.
Do you think the reaction of government was less to do with security and more to do with the fact that we have traditionally been neurotically secretive?
Well, funnily enough, the Dean Committee that we've been talking about earlier have just published their minutes of their last meeting in November. So that is a meeting of the press side and the official side, and the vice chairman of that body said it was important to distinguish between embarrassment and genuine concerns for national security. The vice chairman felt that much of the material published by The Guardian fell into the former category. So a lot of this stuff is embarrassing because it's come into the public domain rather than threatening to national security.
Would you agree that you performed a very important public service for legislators and for everyone else? Difficult question, I know.
There is no doubt in my mind, and I'll say this again, and it's not blowing my own trumpet because...
No, please do.
Well, it's not done in that spirit, and this has been a coalition of newspapers, including newspapers in Europe. This is material. It's self-obvious. It's self-evident. If the President of the United States calls a review of everything to do with intelligence, and that information only came into the public domain through newspapers, then it is self-evident, is it not, that newspapers have done something which oversight failed to do. And I would say that was true of this country and of the United States.
I'm grateful to you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Nicola Blackwood and then Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rusbridger, I'm interested to understand as an editor, when you come into possession of documents of this nature, which clearly indicate a big story for you, but also contain very sensitive national security material, how do you go about judging what you can publish and what you can't publish?
I don't know of an editor in the world who doesn't agonise about these kind of decisions in the way that you would expect. We touched on it earlier. We're all patriots.
Yes.
We all care about security.
To be more specific, how in this case did you go about it in terms of the specific process?
I discussed this with colleagues who are some of the most experienced colleagues in Fleet Street in terms of dealing with this kind of material. And it's important to know that since in the last 6 months there have been more than 100 contacts with the official side of things. So in America that has been with the White House, with the Director of National Intelligence, with the FBI, with the NSA, with the National Security Council and with the Pentagon. In this country it has included Downing Street, the Cabinet Office, the National Security Advisor, GCHQ themselves, and the Dean's Committee. So we have consulted on more than 100 times with the agencies in order to be aware of their concerns before we publish material.
And so I suppose my question is, have you gone through all the 53,000 documents and have some been specifically excluded from publication and will they not be appearing? Have others been put into the yes, okay for publication?
Well, as I said to begin with, I think we have published, in terms of actually publishing documents, I think we've published 26.
Yes, but I'm more thinking about the ones which have not yet been.
And we've published a few more in individual pages from documents which have been redacted. I would not be expecting us to be publishing a huge amount more of documents. There's 26 over 6 months. It's been I would say it's been a trickle.
And what about the ones which have been communicated to the United States? Because I understand some of those, the names have been redacted and some of them haven't. So how did you go about deciding which names to redact and which ones not to?
Let's be completely clear about this. The Guardian has not used any names. Just and the rare occasion where we've used individual slides from documents which had names on, we absolutely redacted those. It's been said that the Guardian used names. We didn't use names.
Mr. Rusbridger, you made it clear that no names
Yeah,
were used.
Yes,
but
that's
nevertheless,
really the question that I asked here. I asked where you communicated the documents to the United States,
Yes.
and in some cases in those documents you did redact the names, and in other cases you didn't.
No,
How did you decide?
no, you're wrong. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was the case.
No, we haven't.
So you
used,
haven't redacted any names?
We have not used any names. We have
No,
redacted.
but where you communicated the documents to other papers, which you
Oh, I see.
said
Before transmission.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, you're quite right.
So where you sent
Sorry,
names...
what is she right about? I'm confused. Is she right about you sent the names or you redacted the names?
At the risk of repeating myself, there were names in these documents. The
Yes.
HM government has been aware of that.
And
Those
did,
documents were shared with the New York Times.
and did you redact any of those names
Not
before
before
sending
they were
them?
sent.
You just sent the names as they were out of the country.
The New York Times has not used any names either.
Right. And did you have an agreement before you sent the documents that they wouldn't be
We
used?
did.
You did. And what about with the Washington Post?
Washington Post was leaked material directly by Edward Snowden.
Okay. But you're working with them, I understand. You said
We're not working with the Washington
you're
Post.
not working with them at all? No. Okay.
The only other body we're working with in America is ProPublica,
Okay.
which is the chief of ProPublica is a man called Paul Steiger, who's got 16 Pulitzer Prizes to his name and is extremely experienced in handling this kind of material.
And did you send documents to him?
That was the material that I referred to earlier, one story, a small number of documents.
Okay.
But he has access. Again, it's open knowledge. I gave the cabinet, after the cabinet secretary, his name in mid-July.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola Backwood. A quick supplementary from Mr. Reckless, just on names, and then we
Can I
just
just ask why you didn't redact those names before sharing them with the New York Times?
There were 58,000 documents, Mr. Reckless.
So the public interest defence is not actually the journalism, but that you didn't have the time or didn't want to spend the resources going through them before sharing them with the New York Times.
There was a direct. There were conversations with the cabinet secretary, which led me to think that it was wise to share this material.
Thank you. The ceremony that took place in your basement, when the secret ceremony, attended by yourself and others, how many people were there?
There were 2 from the GCHQ side and I think 2 or 3 from the Guardian.
And you all just broke up the hard disks and the laptops, is that right? Is that what everyone was
Yeah,
doing?
it's harder to smash up a computer than you might think. They wanted to. I believe they have giant food mixer. Things like food mixers into which you can drop a computer, which would reduce.
So the food mixer was brought to the basement of the
No,
Guardian?
we did it
you
with
popped
Black and
things in?
Deckers.
Yes. And was there any point in that exercise if you had the documents anyway and you were going to publish them? The food mixer thing?
Well, the serious point is this, and it goes back to Spycatcher, that I was completely clear with the cabinet secretary that there were copies elsewhere,
Right.
and that the destruction of these computers was not going to stop reporting. I think.
But they still went ahead and brought the food mixer and you still had the
We
ceremony?
did it with our Black and Deckers, but to their instructions. I think that I accept this was a hard choice for the government. I think they were balancing a free press with security. I understand the nature of the choice, but the point was that I think the alternative to having newspapers, and you can criminalise newspapers all you like and try and take them out of this.
Yes.
The next leaker, the next Edward Snowden, the next Chelsea Manning won't go to newspapers. They'll dump this stuff on the
Yes,
internet.
we understand that's a wider point, but just on the ceremony, it was just a public relations exercise in the end.
I wouldn't say that, but I would say it was pointless. Their aim was to stop publication and to have a dialogue of the sort that we were having, and Mr. Robbins' witness statement makes it apparent the reason they didn't go for an injunction was because they felt
Yes.
that we were behaving responsibly. They lost control of the documents the moment they destroyed them in London.
Thank you. Riazman Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From what you've said this afternoon, is it the case that you say that what you published, or the newspaper published, would not have caused any harm to any intelligence personnel, nor put into risk any intelligence operation dealing with security issues?
Well, I don't know, because no one has come to me and said this is the specific harm that you've done. I've seen lots of people who have dealt with the security agencies. I've seen the former Lord Chancellor, I've seen former Home Office ministers, former Foreign Office ministers, Paddy Ashdown, who was a former Royal Marine. I've seen people who are serious figures who have dealt with the agencies, who say that one should always treat the claims of national security with proper scepticism. I think that is a proper thing. And I said the only story which any member of Parliament has directly referred to was the story about the Tor, the so-called deep internet, which I'm very happy to talk about if anybody's interested.
Okay. And second question is, Ben Emerson, Queen's Counsel, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on Counter-Terrorism, they've just announced they're going to be looking into this whole issue about intelligence gathering or information gathered by USA and the UK. And he actually, and I'm just going to summarise what he said, that it's the role of the free press to hold the government to account, and that some of the suggestions from the Tory MPs that Guardian should face criminal investigation, and even some of the tabloid newspapers joining that. Are you welcoming the UN investigation into this issue about the whole issue about gathering of various information and the extent of it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we just had a long and tortured debate about Leveson. And during that debate, we heard repeated assurances from all three party leaders that the politicians would not interfere in the press. And it seems to me, at the very first hurdle, Parliament is in danger of falling in that. As I say, I quoted earlier the General Counsel of the NSA, so this is not necessarily a friend of journalists. He is a full-time securocrat, saying, of course, we didn't want this stuff in the public domain. And I perfectly understand why intelligence agencies want to keep all this stuff secret. But once it is in the public domain, once it is in the hands of the press, the NSA guy says the press must be protected. And that is a wonderful thing about America, and I think it's a lesson which we're still learning in this country.
Yeah. And my final question is in relation to the fact that there has been articles published in your newspaper, and I think others have expressed at times, and I know the Chair has alluded to this, about the fact there is a question about the extent of parliamentary oversight of the working of the security agencies. Can I just ask, and I know in the end Parliament will not make its own decision, but do you have some suggestions as to possible ways that Parliament can in fact improve or have more oversight of what the security agencies are doing?
Well, I think somebody has to hold the ring between these conflicting debates. We're not talking about one public interest here. Security is obviously a very great public interest. No one's contradicting that. There is a public interest in privacy. There is a public interest in the economic health of tech companies, the economic basis of the digital economy in this country. I've seen the figure of 36 billion as the likely damage to US and UK companies because people are not going to trust these companies on the basis of some of the stories that have come into the domain. So I think oversight has to include people who you need a privacy advocate. You need somebody external who has the technical knowledge, which I doubt many of the members of that committee have. They have a small budget, 1.3 million, and I think there are all kinds of questions that parliamentarians have started asking about whether it's right for this not to be a full select committee of the House. whether it's right that the chair should be a former person who's had dealings with the intelligence committees and responsibility for them, and whether they have enough resource, and so on and so forth. So I think I'm hearing very helpful suggestions and very interesting suggestions about how the ISC might be reformed as a result of newspaper coverage.
Thank you, Ms. Grishy. Thank you, Mr. Rusbridger. Ian Austin.
Thank you. What's the sort of point of principle? I mean, it's obvious, isn't it, that all governments are going to gather intelligence and all governments are going to sort of keep that information secret. And why should I accept from you that you're better placed to judge what bits of that information should become public? Why are you better placed to be able to judge that than the heads of the security services who say that Al-Qaeda is having a field day and this has helped Britain's enemies?
I'm not claiming to be better placed than the heads of the security agencies. I'm just saying there is a broader debate than just security. And in the democracy that I want to live in,
I accept that.
I don't want the national security to be used as a trump card that says, I'm sorry, you can't publish anything else because national security is going to trumple that.
Well, I'm not suggesting that though, but what I want to know is when they, when the people who are sort of experts in this, dealing with it all the time, serving the country and protecting, trying to protect us all, say that this is stuff that shouldn't be in the public domain, how can you argue that you and the colleagues at the Guardian that you consulted are better able to make a judgment on that, which obviously you do because you went ahead and published it?
Well, the Tor story. Let's talk about the Tor story. And Tor, for members of the committee who aren't familiar with this, is a system of communicating in encrypted form. It was built by the US Navy. It is funded to this day by the State Department. Why is it funded by the State Department? It's funded so that dissidents in horrible countries can communicate safely. So that's a good thing, isn't it? It's also used by paedophiles. So that's a bad thing. So if we publish a story after talking to the White House for 3 weeks to say that this is a network which still seems to be safe to use, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's good for dissidents and it's good for paedophiles. Sure, but we use our judgment and to come back to the earlier question, there was nothing the Guardian published that is not on the Tor's own website.
I think there are two separate things here. It's one thing to report on the extent of surveillance and to say this information is being gathered and to sort of report the facts that this is happening. That's one thing. I think it's something very different to then, transmit the information in a risky way, in an insecure way, which could put at risk, security personnel. I mean, I think these are two very different things, aren't they? I'm not worried if, the Americans are embarrassed or if, I'm not arguing, reporting the extent of surveillance is fine. But I think the transmission of the information and the way you managed it, I think is something very different.
So I took your question to be the judgment of editors versus the judgment of security services, but you're making a different point now, which is...
Well, it's a separate question, yeah.
Well, all I can say is that the material, we can talk endlessly about how the material held it. The only time the material has leaked has been from the NSA, not from the Guardian. You understand that point?
Why was some of the names redacted? I'm not clear why. I'm not clear why some of the names in some of the information that you sent was redacted and some of it wasn't. Is it because you didn't know what was in all of the 58,000 files before they were sent?
The redaction was of any documents that we published that might have had a name on it. We have not used any names. So in redaction, I'm talking about published material.
Right. And stuff that was transmitted, I mean, that was just transmitted as it was.
We did some cleaning up, but we did not clean up every one of the 58,000 documents.
What proportion of 58,000 documents were read before they were sent to other people?
I couldn't tell you.
Because
I don't know.
So you don't know what was transmitted, really, do you? I mean, you don't know. And the guy Miranda, when he was transporting this stuff, had the files encrypted, but had a bit of paper in his pocket with the passwords to unencrypt them. That doesn't strike me, as Ollie Robbins said, as being, the best sort of way of looking after secure information?
Well, that's not.
I mean, that
quite,
is, I think, a matter of legitimate concern.
Yes, that's not. But actually, what you say is factually not quite right.
That's what Ollie Robbins told the Telegraph.
Well, if you read his witness statement, it's not quite right. What he talks about is the password to one file, which was a kind of index to other files. If you read Mr. Robbins' witness statement, which was made 11 days after the material was seized, it is apparent that the encryption on the files themselves have not been broken by GCHQ's finest. There's a supplementary witness statement given some time later, in which the case they make for retaining the files is that the police couldn't break the files of the kind of encryption that was being used.
Was any of the information taken home from The Guardian by any of your staff?
No.
Right. In the documentary about WikiLeaks, James Ball, he says that he took a copy of the encrypted documents back home to his flat. But in this case, you're absolutely certain that that didn't happen.
Yes, the material was held in I mean, we were not blind to the sensitivity of this material, and we went to more precautions over this material than any other story we have ever handled.
Final question, Mr.
And this was not being carried around in that way.
Okay. There was, in the earlier questions, just one point of clarification. You were asked about the D notices, and you said that there was one story that didn't follow that process. Is that the Tor story, or was that something else?
Or the one story in relation to D notices?
Yeah.
No, that was the story which I think falls under the category of political embarrassment rather than national security, which was about the bugging of leaders at the G20 meeting in London.
Right.
Thank you. In your Orwell lecture in November 2011, you set out a number of criteria, 5 Rusbridger tests that journalists must follow if they're going to be involved in intrusive behaviour. Indeed, the Guardian has been commended by this committee and others for the work you did on phone hacking. Do you think that what you have done meets those 5 tests in regards to sufficient cause, the integrity of motive, the methods used, that there's proper authority, and that there's a reasonable prospect of success? Have they met those tests?
Yes, we were discussing that this week. I think they're very good tests. It's
well, they're yours. So
yeah, well, it's harm versus good. It's authority. It's proportionality. 1%, not all of it. And it's no fishing expeditions. And one of the things I said to the reporters right at the beginning of this is we're not going to use this as a brand tub for stories. There is stuff in there about Iraq, Afghanistan. We're not even going to look at it. That's not what Edward Snowden was doing when he wanted journalists, responsible journalists, to go through this material. And so I believe we've abided by those 5 tests.
Are you in touch personally with Mr. Snowden?
I'm not.
You're not?
No.
But somebody else is on your behalf?
Not since Mr. Greenwald left The Guardian. We have no contact with him.
Okay. Can I just say to colleagues, I'm going to ask you to ask those who've indicated one question. We have the Commissioner coming in. I'd like Mr. Rusbridger to go before he arrives, not for any reason other than I don't suspect anything's going to happen. But we have another session on counter-terrorism. Dr. Huppert first, then Mr. Ellis, then Mr. Winnick.
Thank you. There are many interesting things, but I think I'd be grateful for any advice you give us on how we can resolve this fundamental problem that the security services will tend to say, trust us, this is a problem, but we can't prove it to you. And that there is simply no way to explore that properly. We also have the issue that terrorism, like paedophiles, I think were referred to by my colleague earlier, is clearly something which is so heinous that you should do anything to stop it, and this is often used to argue for further legislation. What is the solution to this conundrum? How can we avoid ourselves being in this constant position where the security services will just claim things and there's no way to establish it? Because we need to have the surveillance, we need to have the oversight. How can we break that gap? What would your recommendations be?
Yeah, well, okay, well, I mean, as briefly as possible, and this is clearly the dilemma at the heart of it. Yeah. And in the real world, this is going to come back to Parliament, and Parliament is going to have, and Congress, all countries with security services are going to have to work out this question of oversight. But those committees, it seems to me, must contain the technological challenge and the representatives of civil society who can represent the public interests in things which are not purely security.
Thank you. Mr. Ellis, one question.
Mr. Rusbridger, your journalist James Bull said in a documentary called We Steal Secrets that he took top secret encrypted documents back to his flat, as Mr. Austin has pointed out to you. And in an online interview, I think on BuzzFeed with David Miranda, he said one of your staffers at The Guardian was due to carry some stolen secret files, got cold feet, and then they were sent via Federal Express. Did you know that Federal Express conditions of carriage include at Section 8, subsection 16, that would be an unauthorised thing to do? I think you said to Mr. Reckless that you had used Federal Express. My question to you, frankly, is, bearing all that in mind, do you not accept that you have been, at the very least, woefully irresponsible with secret information and thereby people's lives?
Mr. Rusbridger.
The James Bull quote, as you know, is about WikiLeaks, not about this story at all. It's got nothing to do with this story. And no, I don't accept your premise.
Thank you. Mr. Winnick?
Can we clarify the situation where we go from here, or where the Guardian goes from here? The Prime Minister, and I quoted, if not directly, what he said in the House, threats have been made, some may describe it as intimidation, use whatever this word one would like. Will the Guardian continue to publish, despite all that, revelations from Snowden which you consider should be in the public domain?
We have been working slowly and responsibly through this material with some of the best journalists in the world, 100 contacts with government and agency sources, so we will continue to consult them. But we're not going to be put off by intimidation, but nor are we going to behave recklessly.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that.
Mr. Flynn has a final.
What question do you think this committee should ask the head of MI5, obviously, bearing in mind he likes advance notice of questions?
Well, I think the question that Mr. Huppert raises at the end is the crucial one. I've met most of the heads of agencies, and I know they're serious people who think about these things. But equally, it's apparent that some elements of the intelligence services, I'm speaking generally, not necessarily about ours, have been a bit out of control, literally, because they were not within the control of people who should have known about it. So that is a dangerous state of affairs, and if it's true of America, it is to some extent true here because of the relationship between NSA and GCHQ. So I think the question for the head of MI5 is the one that Mr. Huppert raised, which is, what is the forum in which this can be meaningfully overseen with people who have understanding of the technology, who are adequately resourced, and who understand the broader questions and the broader public interests of civil society which are engaged by these questions.
And you were quite satisfied that those who protect our country by gathering information and dealing with terrorist organisations like Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab and other organisations have not been undermined by what you have done. And those of us who sleep safely in our beds at night should not feel that they have been undermined at all by what the Guardian
Well,
has
the
done.
biggest threat is if you're working in a situation where there are people inside these organisations who are so troubled by what they see and who are troubled by the relationship between the legality of what's going on and what engineers can now do, what President Obama said, what they can do as opposed to what they should do. As long as you've got people amongst those hundreds of thousands of people who are so troubled that they're going to leak these massive databases in order to generate the public debate that the President says is necessary, then you've got no security. And President Clinton talked the other day about we're in danger of having a world where there's no privacy and no security. That's a bad situation for everyone. So I think there are mature conversations to be had as a result of what's been published.
Mr. Rusbridger, thank you very much for coming here. You've been very clear and open in your evidence. Thank you. Order. Could I have the Commissioner, please? Deputy Assistant Commissioner Dick, thank you very much for coming. We thought you were not going to be able to join us, Ms. Dick, but you're here.
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we're also delighted. Commissioner, could I start with just a couple of issues before we turn to the issues of counter-terrorism? Of course, no session with any police officers are complete without asking the Andrew Mitchell question, since it's been so much in the fore. And the last time you appeared before us, which was in January of this year, matters had not been concluded and the reports had not been ended. We now have a situation where one of your officers has been charged with a criminal offence and 8 are now subject to disciplinary proceedings. Is that factually correct?
That's right, although one of the officers is also charged with a criminal offence. So a total of 8, one of which is charged with a criminal offence and an issue of misconduct.
Bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind the statement that you made to Victoria Derbyshire, which was broadcast and then picked up by many others, do you regret saying that you were 100% behind your officers, since we now are clear that 8 are subject to disciplinary proceedings? I know hindsight is a wonderful gift that they don't give you when you become Commissioner, nor members of Parliament, but on balance, on reflection, it was the wrong thing to say, and would you like to take this opportunity of apologising or regretting what you have done?
Well, I think, first of all, just as I think we had the same conversation the last time I appeared before the committee, and I think that what I've tried to say is, first of all, at the time, last time I appeared before your committee, if anything I've said at any time has misled anybody to believe that we're not going to have a ruthless inquiry, then I apologise for that. What I tried to explain was that at the time I made the statement, circumstances were different to as we find them now. Because I think I made that statement on the 21st of November of last year. Now, at the time, Andrew Mitchell had resigned from his post on the 19th of October. He previously apologised to the officer for his behaviour. The Operation Alice Leak investigation into the leak of the police log published in the Daily Telegraph was completed in October, prior to me making that statement. And that was said prior to the Met, excuse me, being made aware of the letter sent to John Randall MP, which we were informed about, I think it was around the 13th of December. So while later, as you say, it appears unwise, and I acknowledge that, I wouldn't want to let anybody think that we're doing anything other than being independent in our investigation. At the time, those were the circumstances when I made the comment.
But bearing in mind now we've had 3 chief constables apologising for their forces, other officers, the president of ACPO, looking back, and I think everyone wants to turn the page on this at some stage, quite quickly, I think in some circumstances. Do you want to draw a line by basically apologising for what the Met did?
I don't think I can at this moment, only because until I've heard we've all heard the outcome of the criminal investigation and prosecution, and also the gross misconduct and the misconduct charges, I think I'd be unwise to say anything. I think I just draw the attention of the committee to a couple of things I have said, though, which is at the conclusion of these proceedings, if there is a need to apologise to Andrew Mitchell for anything that any Metropolitan Police officer has done, I will do it. I'll do it personally if that's necessary, but I'm only hesitating to make those comments until we've given a fair chance to the criminal justice system and also the misconduct process. But I have no inherent defensiveness about making those comments at the appropriate time. And I think there will be a need to clear the air should any of those findings be found against the Met.
Now, we've been troubled by evidence we've received in successive evidence sessions about the crime figures and evidence given to our sister committee, the Public Administration Committee, that basically the crime figures in the Met are being fiddled. One of your officers talked about a misrecording of between 22 and 25% for rape and serious